So I guess the one thing that's really worth mentioning about plants as a botanist is that they are the basis of material culture for humankind. If you think about it, it's really plants that are the basis of human culture. What do they provide us with? Shelter, right? We build things out of them. They provide us with medicine. Most medicines are derived from plants, or at least the ideas nowadays for pharmaceutical drugs. And they provide us with food. And so really plants have been the basis of human material culture as long as there have been humans. Just a quick example, how did the Vikings get around? Well, on wooden ships made with canvas sails, right? So it's hard to overestimate the importance of this kingdom, and you obviously know a lot about them. That doesn't even consider the ecological thing with that oxygen and sugar that we enjoy. So what words can we string together to define the kingdom Plantae? Eukaryotic, photosynthetic, multicellular, and they have chlorophyll A and chlorophyll B, which is an interesting thing to think about. This separates them out a little bit from the kingdom Protista with the algae, which are also photosynthetic. Okay. So here's the taxonomy, and some of these are not on your sheet. Just be aware. Just do the ones on your sheet, but we'll just blow through these really fast. And unfortunately, right away we have an error. Hang on, stand by. Need to fix this. Bryophyta are the mosses, not the mosses and ferns. Bryophyta are the mosses. Hepatophyta the liverworts, excuse me, whatever the heck that is. Lycophyta the lycopodiums, and splenophyta the horsetails, and then pterophyta the ferns. That's the basic taxonomy of the spore plants. And so we divide the plants up into spore plants and seed plants. And we'll go through and look at some pictures of these here in just a second. Because, you know, most of you can recognize some of these. So what about the bryophyta, the mosses? Mosses are the oldest, most primitive land plants, and we believe from the algae came the bryophyta. The mosses marched onto land. But one of the things about them is they don't have vascular tissue, and that limits their size. I mean, the tallest moss you ever saw is maybe an inch tall. Most of you could recognize a moss. Hepatophyta, maybe not so much, but they're closely related to mosses, and they're commonly called liverworts because the way that their growth form kind of mimics a human liver. It goes back to the doctrine of signatures when humans looked at things and said, oh, it's shaped like a human liver, let's call it a liverwort. And then the ferns. Most of you, again, could probably recognize a fern, the pterophyta. Their relevance as ornamentals, you know, is important. Other than that, you know, they have a lot of ecological roles and fill niches. There are also tree ferns, which we kind of forget about because we don't have them around here. But if you go to the tropics, these ferns can get 20 or 30 feet tall. Don't worry about the life cycle. And then the lycophyta, these are called fern allies, the lycopodiums. I'm not sure that one's on your list, but there's a picture of it. You can see it looks kind of like a moss, really. And then the horsetails become relevant. You can see why they call them horsetails in this one picture. They're branched, and they look sort of like a green horsetail. You've maybe seen these. They look a little bit like bamboo, and you would see them along waterways and riverbanks. And the relevance of the splenophyta is more historical. If you think about the Carboniferous period, the coal that we burn, a lot of it came from these giant horsetails, which once lived on Earth when the Earth was warmer and wetter back in the Carboniferous about 250 million years ago. Then we get to the seed plants, Coniferophyta, Ginkgophyta, Gnetophyta, and Psychophyta. Again, I'm not sure they're all on your list, but we'll just go through them. And this group of seed plants is collectively known as the gymnosperms. Gymnosperm means naked seed, And what we're talking about is that these don't make a flower, they make a cone. And you're familiar with the coniferophyta and like a pine cone, for example. So out of these groups, the one that you would know the most about or be able to recognize would be the conifers, the coniferophyta, spruce, fir, pine, redwood. This group is extremely important as building material, right? And so the coniferous phyta also holds a lot of records in the plant kingdom. The greatest biomass of any single stem is held by the sequoia. This is a California species, and you can see the person there for scale. 80,000 cubic feet of biomass in one stem of a giant sequoia. They hold the record for the oldest or some of the oldest known living plants. That would be the bristlecone pines, which you can see in this picture. Doesn't look like much, but it's probably 3,500 years old or more. And so these trees can live to be a really long, they can live to be really old. These grow in California as well on ridge tops. And then the coniferophyta holds the record for the tallest tree. That would be the redwood. And you can see here, there's a car driving through it. And I heard recently this one had fallen down, which is kind of sad. But these trees can reach 350 feet in height. So aside from that, the conifers are important because we build things with them, right? If you go to Lowe's and buy a 2x4, it's going to be stamped SPF or spruce, fir, pine. So, you know, this is the lumber of choice for building houses. Then there's the ginkgo phyta. If we were at AB Tech, we would be in the sycamore building, but right out front, there's a big ginkgo tree. And you can see this, there's only one known species, Ginkgo biloba. Ginkgo biloba is recently been touted as a medicinal plant and a brain tonic. It's a mild vasodilator. It dilates blood vessels a little bit. If you they make tincture out of the leaf, or I suppose you could make a tea. This looks like a fruit, but really it's a fleshy cone. It didn't come from a flower. Anyway, this vasodilation process, it opens up your blood vessels. And the idea is, well, if there's more blood reaching your brain, there's more oxygen, it's going to make you smarter. Well, if ginkgo makes you smart, then Viagra would make you really smart, because Viagra is a potent vasodilator. So, you know, take it with a grain of salt, but the ginkgo is used medicinally for that purpose. And what's interesting, this is the only species in this entire division. All the rest are extinct. We have probably 1,000 fossil species of ginkgo phyta. And then the cycadophyta, again, I don't know if this one's on your list, but these are the cycads. You've seen them maybe on the coast, and you can see the cone here. And the leaves look very palm-like, but they're actually not flowering plants. They're cone-bearing plants. And then the gnetophyta, this is ephedra. And this one's worth just spending a second talking about. Ephedra contains a chemical called ephedrine and another chemical called pseudoephedrine. And these are vasoconstrictors. And so they're kind of the opposite of the ginkgo. Rather than dilating blood vessels, they constrict them. Chemicals that do this tend to speed you up. And so you've maybe taken Sudafed before for a cold. The idea is it constricts the blood vessels of your sinuses and shrinks the swelling of your sinuses if you have a cold. But if you've ever taken too much, you know, it makes you pretty jittery. And in fact, if you've lately gone to buy Sudafed, you know, they now when you try to buy a pack of Sudafed, they ask for your driver's license, because ephedrine or pseudoephedrine is the active ingredient in making crystal methamphetamine. So they cook it down. So now, you know, you can't just go and fill your shopping cart up with Sudafed and make a purchase without it being a red flag. So this plant is used as an herb, and, you know, people do make tea out of it as a caffeine-like or coffee-like speed. And then I put this one in there just for fun. This is this weird plant called Welwitschia. It grows in the Namib Desert, which is the driest place on Earth. Excuse me. And you can see there's not much else out here, but this weird plant in the gnetophyta survives. And then the last group is the Magnolia phyta, where we dump all the flowering plants. And, so the flowering plants are relatively late in evolution. They came along about 80 million years ago, and they are by far the most successful. We believe there are probably 300,000 species. Think about all the food that you eat. All the vegetables and plant material that you eat, it all comes from this group of flowering plants, all the fruits, all the green leafy vegetables. So incredibly important as a group of plants. And kind of at the pinnacle of evolution for the flowering plants are the orchids, which we have some here, but mostly they live in the tropics. Okay, so that was the quick and dirty on the plant kingdom. And again, you want to know the taxonomy, and you want to know, we won't worry so much about human relevance because it's obvious. And that brings us into the animals, of which we are members, right? Not sure where my PowerPoint went. Oh, that's not what I wanted to do. Okay, well, let's see. Guess I closed that window. Let me get back into Moodle. Sorry, talking to myself now. Okay, here we go. Back to the beginning. So there are a few slides in the animal PowerPoint that are a little gruesome, just to warn you. I'll try to give you the heads up, but if you are a queasy sort looking at stuff, you might want to look away or something. I don't know. All right, here we go. So what are some words we can string together to define the animals? Well, eukaryotic heterotrophic, no cell walls. As soon as you see no cell walls, you know it's an animal, and usually motile. Although adult animals might not be motile, like for example, a sea sponge, there's some stage in their life cycle that's motile. It could just be flagellated sperm, for example. So we're going to go through these kind of in phylogenetic order, meaning order of evolutionary relatedness, from primitive to advanced. And the sponges, the phylum Porifera, would be considered the most primitive of all animals. You can see Porifera means pore bearer because they're full of little pores. And these organisms make their living sort of passively filtering the water of debris and using it for food. Next, we get to the Cnidaria. These are the jellyfish, the corals, and the sea anemones. And you can see this one here is a beautiful one, but also deadly. This is a Portuguese man of war. So immediately we have some human relevance here. Jellyfish can be very dangerous, and people die every year from jellyfish stings. I know that seems crazy, but they do. The box jellyfish in the Portuguese man of war can wreak havoc on you if you get tangled up in their tentacles. The corals are also relevant, obviously, from an ecological standpoint because they're the basis of ecosystems. When you look at coral, you're looking at thousands or millions of tiny little jellyfish living in these little calcium shells that they've created. And then there's a nice picture of some corals, and you can see the little tentacles of the coral there. Oops, shoot. I was going to give you the warning and I forgot. Next, warning, we have the nematoda, and these are the unsegmented roundworms, not to be confused with earthworms, which are segmented roundworms. So the genus is Ascaris, and some of the things in this group that you're familiar with, Ascaris is a large genus of nematodes that are parasitic. many of which are on mammals, domestic animals, or humans. This includes lungworms and heartworms. So the one you'd be familiar with would be heartworms in dogs, filarial worms, and what you're seeing here is actually a filarial worm. These things get in the lymphatic system and can cause elephantiasis. They literally block the lymphatic system, and you have edema or swelling. And so this one, unfortunately, is coming out of this dude's eye, which is pretty harsh. Sorry, I know it's harsh. And this is the guinea worm, which is also in the nematoda. And here, these live right under the skin. And you can see this poor guy, he's trying to get this one out of his foot. And you have to be really careful. You can twist it onto a stick is usually what they do. And each day they'll twist it a little more. You have to be careful. If you break it, then all the eggs come out and then you get reinfected even worse. And so, you know, be thankful you don't live in places where these terrible parasites live. And then this is elephantiasis from the filarial worm, the first one we saw. And you can see the edema, the amount of swelling here. This is this guy's leg or person's leg, all caused by this group of parasites, a very dangerous group of organisms. Then we get to the flatworms, the platyhelminthes. The flatworms include tapeworms and also an organism called planaria, which we won't really look at. But you can see here's the head of the tapeworm, and then it has all these little sections, and each of these sections is called a proglottid, and it's full of eggs. And if you've ever wormed your dog or your cat, you may have seen these coming out of the rear end of your animal. What generally happens is one of these gets ingested by another animal, and then the infection reoccurs. And humans can get dog and cat tapeworms, so you have to be really careful around your pet feces. You can see the scolex, this hooked head that it hooks down like grappling hooks into your intestines. And then these are these sucking mouth parts that suck the nutrient out of your body. The mollusca. So again, with the tapeworms, just to go back for a second, how are they relevant? Well, they're parasites, right? And anything that's parasite of domestic animals or pets or humans is going to be relevant. Mollusca includes some land animals like slugs and snails, but also marine animals, including barnacles, scallops, oysters, clams, octopus, squid. These are all mollusks. All of these mollusks are important. Many of these mollusks, rather, are important for what? Well, they're delicious, or at least a lot of people think they are. And so we eat them, right? We eat scallops, oysters, clams, octopus, squid. It's all eaten as food. That makes it really important. And then snails and slugs can be pests. They can be pests of plants. That would make them relevant. Then we get to the Arthropoda, which is, I believe, the largest phylum of animals. And the Arthropoda includes insects, spiders, and crustaceans. And if you look at your sheet, we break it down into some classes. We do the class Insecta, which are the insects, the class Arachnidae, which are the spiders, and the class Crustacea, which are the crustaceans. And so you want to be sure you know that taxonomy as you go forward. You know, cockroach is in the Insecta, as is a butterfly. A spider is in the Arachnida, and then a scorpion is also an arachnid. We don't have a crustacean on here, but what are the crustaceans and how are they relevant? Well, shrimp, lobsters, crayfish are freshwater crustaceans, and they're relevant because we eat them. Again, they're important food sources all over the world where they live. And then, you know, what about the insects? How are they relevant? Well, they're pollinators, right? They pollinate plants, makes them very important. And then some insects and spiders can also sting you, and some can even cause death, although it's not very common. You know, occasionally people might die from the sting of a spider or even a scorpion. Okay, but it's not the norm. The Annelida are the segmented worms, which include earthworms and leeches. I think leeches is spelled wrong there. It should be two E's. And so, you know, don't confuse them with the roundworms, because the nematoda are unsegmented and these are clearly segmented. We're moving up the phylogenetic ladder, by the way. So, you know, an earthworm is not that far from us in terms of evolution. Believe it or not, we're getting closer to mammals, right? Leeches are parasites, obviously, that's relevant. Earthworms are important as soil decomposers and creators. And then look where the echinodermata is. Echinodermata means rough-skinned. Dermata means skin, echino means rough or scaly. These are the starfish, sea urchins, and sand dollars. These things are, although they look primitive to us, they're actually quite highly evolved. They have a brain and a nervous system. And so the next time you see somebody at the beach, you know, plucking these things out of the ocean and chucking them on the beach, you should just chuck them back in, I think. That's what I always tell people. It also includes the sea urchin, which is an important source of food. Okay. So the echinodermata is right below the chordata. You know, we're not that unrelated to a dang starfish. Seems crazy, but it's true. So now here again, we go into class, right? So let's look at these. On your list, you have the AVs, which are the birds. You have the reptilia, which are things like snakes and turtles. You have the amphibia, which are things like frogs and salamanders. And then you have the mammalia, which are things like a moose and a rabbit. And then I think the other one that's on there is the osteichthyes, which is a big fancy word. Those are the bony fish like a trout. Okay. The chondrichthyes, which is a shark, or the cartilaginous fish, that's not on your list. Okay. So, you know, pretty obvious how these things are relevant, right? I mean, food, for sure. Most meat that you eat is mammal meat. It's cow, or it could be, it's chordate meat. It could be a bird, like a chicken or a turkey. And where do we fall? Well, we are in the mammalia. We are mammals, right? So that actually brings us to the end. Okay. And so let's talk a little bit about the test, because like I said, after today, I'm going to open this test 4 up. And that'll be nice, because then we'll kind of have a week off. We won't meet on Monday. That'll give you time to study. And then we'll check back in on Wednesday, a week from today. By the time we check in, I'm going to assume that most of you have taken the test, and you will have until midnight Wednesday to take the test, but we'll check back in on Wednesday. So make a note, no live stream Monday. Wednesday, we will meet back and talk about the last unit, y'all. It's looking like we'll probably finish up, you know, a little bit early, maybe. We'll take our time with the last unit. We don't want to finish up too early, because then the powers that be, the administrators, start questioning what we're doing. So we'll have to drag it into the next couple of weeks at least. At any rate, what about the test? Here's the deal, okay? You need to know the taxonomy on the sheet. Be able to match the taxonomy. There's going to be matching on the test. That means you don't have to spell anything. You just have to know how to match it, okay? So there's that. In addition to that, for the following groups, the bacteria as just a group of organisms, the kingdom fungi, and the kingdom, the bacteria, the viruses, and the kingdom of fungi, for those three groups, you should know a paragraph's worth of information about them. And you best not be cutting and pasting out of Wikipedia, let me tell you. Okay, it better be in your own words. Now, because I'm telling you that, I may ask for some specific things. And so it would be, I mean, you could write a paragraph out right now before the test, but, it may be that I ask you some specific things, some things to think about with relation to this discussion question on the test. Is the organism autotrophic or heterotrophic? Right, that would be something that you might want to know. Okay, so let's talk about that. I may ask you, tell me if it's autotrophic or heterotrophic. That just means, can it make sugar or not? Some bacteria can do either, right? The fungi are heterotrophic. The viruses aren't even living, right? So you don't have to worry about it for the viruses. What's its life form, Well, we talked a little bit about that. The bacteria are, for the most part, unicellular. Again, the viruses are infectious particles. They're not even alive. And the fungi, just so you know, are typically filamentous in their life form. And then the human relevance. I might say, tell me 5 ways these things are relevant to humans. Are they, what's the good, the bad, and the ugly about the group? Okay, so you have those 3 groups, just to be clear: virus, bacteria, fungi. Be able to make a paragraph. Tell me some info about them and how they're relevant. Okay. And I think, honestly, that kind of wraps things up. I don't really have much of anything else to tell you.